You've heard it 1,000 times. Stop comparing yourself to others. Therapists say it. Self-help books say it. Motivational accounts with sunset backgrounds say it. Comparison is toxic. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison will destroy you. And yet, the happiest, most grounded, most successful people you know still compare themselves to others every single day, often without even noticing they're doing it. So either they're all quietly falling apart, or the story we've been sold about comparison is missing something big. This video is about what it's missing. Psychology spent 70 years studying why we compare, and the answers are not what most people expect. Because comparison isn't a bad habit you need to break. It's a function your brain runs automatically, the same way it regulates your heartbeat. And once you understand how it actually works, fighting it stops making sense. Using it starts making sense instead. Let's get into it. We're in 1954, post-war America. The economy is rebuilding, universities are full, and a psychologist named Leon Festinger publishes a paper that almost nobody outside academia will read for decades. The paper is called A Theory of Social Comparison Processes. The question Festinger was asking seems obvious in hindsight. Why do people compare themselves to others? Everyone knew it happened. Nobody had tried to explain it at the level of basic psychology. His answer was simple, almost embarrassingly simple. We have a built-in drive to evaluate our own opinions and abilities, not a social habit we picked up, not a character flaw, a drive, a core psychological need, the same category as hunger or the need to belong. Here's the problem that follows from that. Most of the time, there's no objective way to evaluate yourself. Think about it. If you want to know how much you weigh, you step on a scale. The number is there. It doesn't care about your feelings. But how do you measure whether you're smart, whether you're a good parent, whether you're brave enough, kind enough, doing enough with your life? There's no scale for any of that. No thermometer. No unit. So your brain does what it always does when hard data is unavailable. It looks for reference points nearby. And those reference points are other people. Other people become the measurement tool, the invisible ruler, the only available benchmark when no objective one exists. Festinger called this social comparison, and he argued it functions as naturally and automatically as breathing. You don't decide to do it. It just runs. One detail in his theory that most people miss: we don't compare ourselves to just anyone. We look for people who seem similar to us. Not Elon Musk if you're starting your first business, not a world champion sprinter if you just started running. People at a roughly similar starting point. Same age, same context, same apparent resources, because that's where the comparison actually tells you something useful. Compare yourself to someone completely different and you learn nothing. Compare yourself to someone close to your situation and suddenly you have real information. That's the logic, and we'll come back to it. 70 years of research after Festinger, psychologists have mapped out something he only partially described. Behind the comparison drive, there are 3 distinct goals. 3 separate reasons why we look at other people's lives. And depending on the person, the moment, the mood, one of them takes over. Sometimes deliberately, usually without any awareness at all. Goal 1, self-evaluation. You look at others to understand where you stand, who you are relative to everything around you. The kid who glances at classmates' grades to figure out if they're actually good at math or just think they are. The person 2 years into their career who scans their colleagues' trajectories to calibrate their own expectations. Tom, the writer who reads other writers not purely for pleasure, but to gauge whether their own work holds up. In these cases, comparison is a navigation tool, an internal GPS that says, you are here, not there. And in that form, it can be completely healthy, useful, even necessary. Where it breaks down is when the evaluation becomes relentless, when it turns into a trial that never ends and you're simultaneously the judge and the one on trial, and there's no verdict that ever sticks. Goal 2. Self-enhancement. The second goal is darker. It's also the one people are least willing to recognize in themselves. It's called self-enhancement. Here's how it works. You compare yourself to someone you believe is doing worse than you in some area, and the comparison makes you feel better, more secure, more solid. Psychology calls this a downward comparison. Or you see the coworker who lost their job and feel a quiet relief about your own position. You hear about someone else's relationship falling apart and think, at least mine is fine. You notice someone failed the exam and feel better about your own average result. It's an emotional protection strategy. When the ego takes a hit, the brain goes looking for someone lower on whatever ladder matters in that moment, just to rebuild some temporary sense of standing. The word temporary is doing real work in that sentence. This form of comparison doesn't build anything. It fills a hole without fixing it. And if it becomes your default, it creates a dependency that's genuinely ugly. Your well-being starts requiring other people to struggle. That's a trap, a comfortable one, which makes it harder to notice. Goal 3, self-improvement. The third goal is the one people feel best about, usually for good reason. Self-improvement. You look at someone doing better than you, further along a path you want to walk, and instead of feeling crushed by the gap, you think, I could get there. This is upward comparison working the way it's supposed to. Kobe Bryant watching Michael Jordan films not to feel small, but to find a map. The person who reads about someone who built a business from scratch not to feel behind, but to see that it's possible. The artist who studies work better than their own, not to quit, but to raise their own bar. The other person becomes a model, a proof that the thing you want to do can actually be done. But here's where it gets complicated, and this part matters a lot. The exact same comparison, same person, same gap, can either drive you forward or push you into a hole. The only variable is whether you believe you can close the distance. If you believe you can, the comparison becomes fuel. If you believe you can't, the same comparison becomes a verdict. Same mirror, completely different image. Everything depends on what you bring to it. Now here's the question that should be bothering you. If comparison can be this painful, this exhausting, this counterproductive, why do we keep doing it? Why do we reload the feed one more time? Why can't we stop caring about someone else's salary, their vacation photos, their seemingly effortless life? The answer is in the brain, and it's more uncomfortable than most people realize, the study that revealed what's actually happening. In 2009, Japanese neuroscientist Hidehiko Takahashi and his team published a study in Science magazine. They wanted to know what actually happens in the brain during social comparison, not what people report feeling, but what the brain physically does. Using fMRI scans, they watched brain activity in real time, while participants read scenarios involving someone similar to them, same age, same field, on doing better or worse in various situations. What they found in the doing worse condition was striking. When participants felt inferior to the person they were reading about, a specific brain region lit up, the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. This is the same region that activates when you experience physical pain. Not metaphorical pain, the actual pain response. So the feeling of inferiority is not just emotional sensitivity or weakness, it's processed by the brain the same way a physical injury is. That's already significant. But the second finding is the one that changes how you think about your own behavior. When the person who had been doing better experienced a failure or setback, a completely different region activated, the ventral striatum, the brain's reward center, the same area that responds to food, money, pleasure. Watching someone you envied struggle produced a measurable neurological reward. This is Schadenfreude, the German word for pleasure at another's misfortune, and Takahashi's team showed it isn't just a shameful thing people feel sometimes. It's a chemical reaction your brain runs on its own, why you can't just stop. Put these two findings together, and you get something that looks a lot like an addiction cycle. You compare yourself to someone, you feel worse, that hurts. You find a comparison that goes the other way, someone doing less well than you. That feels better. The relief registers as a reward. Your brain files away that the comparison loop produced something good and runs it again. It's a variable reward cycle, the same basic mechanism behind gambling, social media scrolling, and a lot of addictive behavior. The key is the unpredictability. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and the brain finds that pattern more compelling than a consistent outcome either way. This is not a willpower problem. It's not about discipline or self-control or maturity. It's neurochemistry doing exactly what it evolved to do. The dopamine piece. There's one more layer worth understanding. Dopamine is usually described as the pleasure hormone, but that framing is off. Dopamine is primarily the anticipation hormone. It fires when you expect a reward might be coming, not only when you receive one, which means every time you open Instagram or LinkedIn or check someone else's profile, your brain releases dopamine before anything even happens, because there's a chance the result will feel validating. That anticipation is the hook, and like any chemical system, tolerance builds. The more you feed it, the more it takes to feel the same thing. Silent addiction, completely legal. Nobody talks about it this way. The reward circuit explains why comparison is hard to stop, but cognitive science shows something else. It also explains why comparison so often leads you to wrong conclusions about yourself and everyone else. Memory is always in the room. When you compare yourself to someone, you're not working with neutral information. Your brain is pulling from your autobiographical memory simultaneously. Every failure you remember, every moment you felt behind, every time something didn't go the way you expected. Brain imaging research shows that during social comparison, the medial prefrontal cortex activates consistently. That's the region responsible for processing information about yourself, and it's the same region that activates during autobiographical memory retrieval. Translation: when you compare yourself to someone today, you're not comparing your present self to their present self. You're comparing a version of yourself weighted with your entire personal history to an image of them that contains almost none of their actual history. That's not a fair comparison, but the brain doesn't flag it as unfair. You overestimate them, it gets worse. Research consistently shows that we exaggerate the qualities of people we compare upward to. We overestimate how happy they are, how together their life is, how easily things came to them. This happens because we only have access to what they show, and what people show is selected, curated, their best version, the moments they chose to make visible. So the comparison you're running is your inside versus their outside, your doubts and fears and private chaos versus their edited public presentation. All that comparison will make you feel worse almost every time, not because you're actually behind, but because you're comparing incomparable things. Cognitive science shows not all comparisons go through rational processing. Some do. You see someone who trained harder and ran a faster race, and you think about what that means for your training. That's a deliberate, analytical comparison, but a lot of comparisons skip that step entirely. Before any analysis happens, you already feel something. The emotional response comes first, and the reasoning comes after, usually to justify the feeling rather than examine it. These emotional comparisons are the ones that drive irrational behavior. Spending money you don't have to keep up with someone, taking risks that don't make sense to appear more capable, or withdrawing completely from situations where you might not measure up. People with social anxiety are especially vulnerable here. For them, the threat signal embedded in comparison, the implicit "you're not enough," gets routed through the same circuits that detect physical danger. Everything described so far existed long before Instagram, TikTok, or LinkedIn. The human brain has been running social comparison for hundreds of thousands of years. Festinger described it in 1954 based on research conducted entirely offline. What the internet did was change the scale at which this machinery operates. For most of human history, your comparison pool was small. Your immediate community, the people in your village or your workplace or your extended family. Maybe a few hundred people at most. Now it's millions. Real time. Available whenever you reach for your phone. And these aren't random people. The ones who get shown to you are algorithmically selected for engagement, which in practice means selected for impressiveness, attractiveness, success, entertainment value. The algorithm doesn't show you people similar to you in Festinger's sense. It shows you the most compelling version of the best performing people in whatever categories the data says will keep you watching. Your prehistoric brain, which evolved to do social comparison in a group of 150 people, is now processing an endless stream of optimized inputs it has no calibration for. Festinger's theory assumed we'd seek out similar others for comparison. Social media gives you no such option. The similar others are buried under the most engaging ones. Research on teenagers makes the damage concrete. Heavy social media use correlates with higher rates of anxiety, depression, and low self-esteem, not because teenagers are fragile, or because they're running a mechanism designed for small group dynamics through a pipeline designed for advertising revenue. Adults do the same thing. We're just better at rationalizing it. Here's where most videos on this topic disappoint you. They tell you to stop comparing yourself to others. Maybe they add some breathing exercises. That advice isn't wrong exactly. It's just not actionable. Telling someone to stop comparing is like telling someone to stop perceiving. The brain will keep running the function. The question is what you do with that. 4 things that actually work. Notice which type of comparison you're in. The next time you catch yourself in a comparison, pause and ask one question. What am I trying to get from this? Am I trying to evaluate where I actually stand? Am I looking for someone doing worse so I can feel better? Am I looking at someone doing better to find direction or to confirm I'm behind? The reason this matters is that automatic comparison is blind. It just runs. A conscious comparison becomes a choice, and choices can be redirected. You can't stop the function. You can change what you do with the output. Choose who you compare yourself to, deliberately. Festinger noted we get the most useful information from comparing to people genuinely similar to us, but we rarely control this deliberately. We let the algorithm, the office, the social context choose for us. You can choose. And the most useful choice available is to compare yourself to who you were a year ago, 5 years ago, at whatever earlier point matters. That comparison has none of the asymmetry problems. You have full access to your past self's inner life, the fears, the unknowns, what you didn't know yet. You're comparing inside to inside. It also measures something more meaningful than a gap. It measures a trajectory. Where you're going matters more than where you are relative to someone else. Treat the feeling as information, not verdict. What you feel when you compare yourself to someone is data about you. It is not a conclusion about your worth. If you see someone's success and feel genuine admiration with some motivation underneath it, that feeling is telling you what you want. That's worth paying attention to. If you see someone's success and feel shame or smallness or that particular quiet dread of being left behind, that feeling is pointing at something you believe about yourself that probably deserves examination. It's not confirming the belief, it's surfacing it. Comparison is a signal. The signal has a source. The source is almost always something inside you, not something about the person you were looking at. Be honest about your digital inputs. Social media is, at its core, a comparison delivery system running on a reward mechanism your brain can't resist and can't accurately calibrate. That's not a moral judgment. It's just a description of what it is. Knowing that, it's completely reasonable to regulate how much of it you run through your system. Unfollowing accounts that consistently make you feel worse without making you any better is not avoidance, it's maintenance. Some people set time limits, some people keep specific apps off their phone, some people curate their feeds aggressively. None of these are magic, and none of them address the underlying mechanism, but they reduce the volume of low-quality input feeding that mechanism, and lower volume means fewer bad cycles running without your awareness. Here's what we actually know. In 1954, Leon Festinger established that we compare because we need to evaluate ourselves, and other people are the only measuring stick available when no objective one exists. The research since then has filled in the rest. 3 distinct goals driving comparison, most of the time without any conscious awareness. Brain circuits that process inferiority as physical pain and reward the suffering of rivals. Cognitive biases that make the people we compare to seem better off than they are. Memory systems that load our personal history into every comparison we run. Emotional shortcuts that produce reactions before any reasoning happens. All of this points to the same conclusion. Social comparison is not a character defect, it's a function, one that almost certainly served our species well for a very long time, are in the conditions it was designed for. The conditions changed, the function didn't. Your brain is running software that evolved for a small tribe, in an environment built to exploit that software at scale. That gap is where most of the suffering comes from. The solution isn't to stop the software from running, it's to understand what it's doing well enough that you can sometimes override the output, redirect the loop, use the signal instead of just feeling it. Compare better, not less, better. If this landed for you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment. Which of the 3 types of comparison hits you the hardest? Evaluating where you stand, finding someone to feel better next to, or the upward comparison that's supposed to inspire but usually just stings? I read all of them. The honest ones tend to become the next videos. See you next time.